You're looking at a photograph from October 15, 1891, taken outside St. Matthias Church in Blackwood Township, Pennsylvania. The image shows 23 mourners gathered around a freshly filled grave during the funeral of elderly Mrs. Catherine Holloway. Among the somber faces, two figures stand side by side near the headstone, brothers Thomas and William Brennan, aged 34 and 31, respectively. What you're about to hear defies every principle of photography, mortality, and time itself. The photograph was discovered in 1963, tucked inside the binding of a parish ledger 72 years after it was taken. When genealogist Margaret Foster first examined the image, she noticed something that made her hands shake. The Brennan brothers appear clearly in the funeral photograph, their faces sharp and unmistakable in the morning light. Yet, according to the Blackwood Township Death Registry, both men had died 3 weeks before Mrs. Holloway's burial. Thomas Brennan died of pneumonia on September 23, 1891. William Brennan died of a heart ailment on September 25, 1891. Both were buried in Green Hill Cemetery, 5 miles from St. Matthias Church. The funeral photographer, Edmund Hayes, had documented Mrs. Holloway's service with his standard plate camera equipment. His technique was meticulous, his reputation spotless throughout the county. No one questioned the image when it was first developed and distributed to the family, but in 1963, when Foster cross-referenced the faces with obituary records, the impossible became undeniable. Expert analysis would later confirm that the photograph showed no signs of double exposure, manipulation, or forgery. The emulsion was chemically consistent with 1891 processing methods. The lighting, shadows, and perspective aligned perfectly with the other figures. Yet, somehow, 2 dead men had attended a funeral. What you're witnessing challenges the fundamental nature of death itself. Modern forensic photography experts have examined this case for decades. They can explain the technical aspects of the image. They cannot explain how the dead returned to mourn the living. The Brennan brothers stand in that photograph, solid as stone, present as breath, 3 weeks after the earth had already claimed them. Their expressions reveal nothing but the appropriate solemnity for such an occasion, as if death were merely an inconvenience, as if the grave were merely another room, as if they belonged there. And perhaps, in ways we cannot comprehend, they did. The autumn of 1891 marked a period of profound change in rural Pennsylvania. The Industrial Revolution had begun reaching into farming communities like Blackwood Township, bringing telegraph lines and railroad connections. Traditional beliefs about death and the afterlife remained deeply rooted, even as modern conveniences slowly transformed daily life. Photography had become more accessible to common families, though still expensive enough to reserve for significant occasions. The Brennan family had lived in Blackwood Township for 3 generations, operating a modest grain mill along Crow Creek. Thomas and William worked the mill together, unmarried men devoted to their trade and their elderly mother. Parish records from St. Matthias show both brothers as regular attendees at Sunday services. Father Michael Donnelly, the parish priest, would later describe them as quiet, dependable men who kept largely to themselves. The mill's ledger, discovered in 1954 during a property survey, reveals the final weeks of their lives in careful detail. Entries show normal business operations through September 20, 1891, recorded in Thomas's precise handwriting. The weather that September had been unusually harsh, with early frost and persistent rain. Both brothers contracted respiratory ailments within days of each other, a common occurrence in the damp mill environment. Dr. Abraham Whitman, the township's only physician, attended both men during their final illness. His medical journal, found sealed in the basement of his former practice, documents their decline. Thomas succumbed first on a Wednesday evening, with his brother at his bedside. William followed 2 days later, weakened by grief and the same lung condition. The funerals were held separately, as was customary, with modest attendance from the local farming community. Both men were interred in matching plots purchased years earlier by their mother. The gravedigger, Samuel Cork, noted in his work log that both coffins were properly sealed and buried. Mrs. Catherine Holloway lived 3 miles from the Brennan Mill, in a small cottage near the church. She had known the brothers since childhood, having been a contemporary of their mother. When she died in her sleep on October 12, 1891, the community naturally expected a well-attended service. The Holloway family commissioned photographer Edmund Hayes to document the funeral, a practice growing more common among families of modest means. Hayes arrived at St. Matthias Church at sunrise on October 15th, carrying his plate camera and chemical equipment. The morning was clear and cold, with sharp shadows that would provide excellent photographic contrast. 23 mourners gathered around Mrs. Holloway's grave as Hayes prepared his apparatus. Among them stood the Brennan brothers, dressed in their familiar dark coats. No one remarked on their presence at the time. No one thought to question why two dead men had come to pay their respects. After all, the Brennans had always been reliable neighbors. Edmund Hayes had photographed over 300 funerals during his 20-year career in Clearfield County. His standard equipment included a large-format plate camera mounted on a sturdy wooden tripod. The photographic process required subjects to remain perfectly still for approximately 15 seconds during exposure. Hayes positioned himself 30 feet from the gravesite, ensuring all mourners would appear clearly in the frame. The October morning light struck the assembled group at precisely 9:47 a.m., according to Hayes's pocket watch. He uncapped the lens and began the exposure, counting silently as the mourners maintained their solemn poses. During those 15 seconds, 23 people remained motionless around Catherine Holloway's grave. The plate captured every detail with remarkable clarity: faces, clothing, the fresh-turned earth, the temporary wooden marker. Hayes completed the exposure and immediately covered the lens, following his standard procedure. He would later develop the plate in his darkroom that same afternoon, using chemicals mixed to his precise specifications. The resulting image showed no irregularities during development. Every figure appeared sharp and properly exposed, including the two men standing near the headstone. Hayes delivered the finished photographs to the Holloway family 3 days later, as promised. Mrs. Eleanor Holloway, Catherine's daughter-in-law, accepted the images without comment. She distributed copies to various family members and close friends of the deceased. The photograph was filed away with other family documents, unremarkable in every way except for its impossible content. Margaret Foster's genealogical research in 1963 focused on tracing Holloway family connections throughout central Pennsylvania. She had requested access to church records, cemetery logs, and any surviving family photographs. The funeral image emerged from a collection donated by Catherine Holloway's great-niece, who had inherited several boxes of family memorabilia. Foster immediately recognized the compositional quality of Hayes's work and began identifying the mourners. Using parish records and obituary files from the Blackwood Township Gazette, she methodically matched faces to names. 21 identifications proceeded without difficulty. Thomas and William Brennan required 3 hours of cross-referencing to confirm their identities. Foster consulted death certificates, burial records, and witness testimony from their funerals. The evidence was unambiguous. Both men had died weeks before the Holloway service, yet their faces in the photograph showed no signs of illness, decomposition, or otherworldly alteration. They appeared as solid and present as any living mourner. Their positioning within the group suggested they had arrived and taken their places naturally. No one seemed to be avoiding them or reacting to their presence with alarm. The brothers stood with appropriate funeral demeanor, hands folded, faces properly grave, as if death had simply failed to notice them. Foster's discovery prompted immediate consultation with photographic experts at the Pennsylvania Historical Society. Dr. Howard Blackwood, curator of the Society's photography collection, examined the image under magnification on November 8, 1963. His analysis revealed no evidence of double exposure, montage work, or chemical manipulation. The silver halide grain structure remained consistent throughout the entire plate. Light sources, shadows, and perspective aligned perfectly with the positioning of all 23 figures. Blackwood's report, filed in the Society's archives, concluded that the image represented a single, unaltered exposure. Professor James Whitmore of the Philadelphia Institute of Photographic Sciences conducted independent analysis in December 1963. Using spectroscopic examination and chemical dating methods, Whitmore confirmed the photograph's authenticity. The emulsion composition matched standard 1891 photographic materials exactly. Age-related deterioration patterns appeared consistent with genuine 72-year-old development. Whitmore's laboratory notes, preserved in his estate papers, document his growing bewilderment as each test confirmed the image's legitimacy. Dr. Sarah Hendricks, a forensic anthropologist from Mansfield University, examined the facial features of the Brennan brothers in January 1964. She compared the funeral photograph against confirmed images taken during the brothers' lifetimes. Bone structure, facial proportions, and distinguishing marks matched with complete accuracy. The men in the photograph were definitively Thomas and William Brennan. Hendricks noted one disturbing detail in her official report. Both brothers appeared healthier in the funeral photograph than in images taken before their deaths. Their faces showed no signs of the respiratory illness that had claimed their lives. Their complexion appeared robust, their posture strong and upright, as if death had restored rather than diminished them. Church records from St. Matthias provided additional verification through Father Donnelly's personal observations. His diary, discovered during renovations in 1965, contained entries from October 15, 1891. Donnelly had noticed the Brennan brothers among the mourners and felt gratitude for their attendance. He specifically noted their presence as a comfort to the deceased's family. The priest had spoken with both men briefly before the service began. He recalled their voices as clear and natural, their conversation appropriate to the somber occasion. Nothing in Donnelly's demeanor or diary entries suggested he found their presence unusual or alarming. The brothers had simply appeared among the other mourners, as they had for dozens of funerals throughout their lives. Yet, according to every official record, they should have been 3 weeks dead. And somewhere in that impossible gap between death and presence, the truth remains buried. 3 competing theories emerged as experts attempted to explain the impossible photograph. The first, proposed by Dr. Blackwood, suggested a case of mistaken identity combined with incomplete record-keeping. Perhaps the men in the photograph were relatives or strangers who bore striking resemblances to the deceased brothers. Rural communities often contained families with similar facial features, and documentation from 1891 could contain errors. This theory gained support from the chaotic nature of small-town record-keeping during the industrial transition period. However, facial analysis by Dr. Hendricks eliminated any possibility of misidentification. The bone structure, ear shape, and distinctive scarring on William's left hand matched perfectly with confirmed lifetime photographs. Professor Whitmore advanced a second theory involving elaborate photographic deception. He proposed that Hayes might have created a composite image using plates taken at different times. Advanced darkroom techniques could theoretically produce seamless combinations of multiple exposures. Hayes possessed the technical skill and equipment necessary for such manipulation. Yet chemical analysis revealed no evidence of composite work or multiple emulsions. The silver grain structure flowed continuously across all 23 figures without interruption or layering. Laboratory examination under electron microscopy confirmed the image as a single, simultaneous exposure. The third theory, hesitantly suggested by Father Donnelly in his private correspondence, involved supernatural intervention. Catholic doctrine acknowledged the possibility of souls returning to complete unfinished earthly business. The Brennan brothers had maintained deep ties to their community throughout their lives. Perhaps their devotion to neighborly duty had transcended the boundaries of mortality itself. Donnelly's letters to the diocesan office, discovered in 1967, revealed his struggle with theological implications. Church doctrine provided no clear guidance for photographed apparitions of the recently deceased. The evidence contradicted both natural law and established religious teaching about the afterlife. Yet Donnelly could not deny his own memories of speaking with both brothers on the morning of Mrs. Holloway's funeral. Each theory contained compelling elements that supported its validity. Each theory also contained fatal flaws that rendered it incomplete. The rational explanations failed to account for the physical evidence of authenticity. The supernatural explanation failed to explain why only the Brennan brothers appeared among all the dead buried in Blackwood Township. Modern forensic experts who have examined the case files acknowledge this fundamental paradox. The photograph exists as a genuine artifact that documents an impossible event. No known principle of science, photography, or theology can reconcile the contradiction. The Brennan brothers appear in that image, solid and present and undeniably dead. And that impossibility remains as sharp today as it was in 1891. The most harrowing confirmation of the photograph's impossible nature occurred on the night of January 17, 1964. Margaret Foster had arranged to examine the original burial sites of Thomas and William Brennan at Green Hill Cemetery. County officials granted permission for a discreet investigation, provided it remained confidential until completion. Dr. Hendricks accompanied Foster, along with Cemetery Superintendent Walter Nash and 2 municipal workers. The temperature had dropped to 14 degrees Fahrenheit, with a bitter wind cutting across the frozen ground. Portable electric lights illuminated the excavation site as work began at 11:30 p.m. The first coffin, belonging to Thomas Brennan, was reached at 2:45 a.m. Nash recorded the exact dimensions and condition of the burial container in his official log. The coffin remained intact, showing normal deterioration patterns for 73 years of burial. When the lid was carefully removed, the interior revealed exactly what the investigators had dreaded finding. Thomas Brennan's remains lay undisturbed, clothed in his burial suit, positioned precisely as he had been interred. The body showed advanced decomposition consistent with the time elapsed since 1891. Dental records, verified against Dr. Whitman's medical files, confirmed the identity beyond question. William's coffin, located 18 inches to the left, contained identical evidence. His remains occupied their original burial position, untouched by any form of disturbance. Both brothers lay in their graves exactly as they had been placed 73 years earlier. Yet both had also stood among the mourners at Catherine Holloway's funeral 3 weeks after their deaths. At 3:17 a.m., as Foster photographed the contents of William's coffin, the portable lights suddenly dimmed. A sound like distant breathing seemed to rise from the frozen earth around the excavation site. Nash later described the sensation as if the ground itself had begun to inhale and exhale. The temperature dropped another 8 degrees in less than 30 seconds, causing visible breath clouds despite the lack of wind. Dr. Hendricks noted that her equipment began malfunctioning simultaneously, cameras clicking without activation, recording devices producing static. Foster's hands trembled as she completed the documentation, not from cold, but from a growing sense of being observed. The sensation persisted until both coffins were resealed and the graves refilled at dawn. Nash filed his report with the county recorder's office that same morning, documenting the undisturbed condition of both burial sites. The official investigation concluded that Thomas and William Brennan had never left their graves. They remained buried in Green Hill Cemetery, exactly where they had been placed in September 1891. Yet, somehow, impossibly, they had also attended Mrs. Holloway's funeral. The consequences of the Green Hill Cemetery investigation rippled through academic and religious communities for months afterward. Dr. Hendricks sealed her research files and declined to publish her findings in any scientific journal. Professor Whitmore requested transfer to a different department, citing irreconcilable conflicts between evidence and rational explanation. Father Donnelly petitioned the diocesan office for reassignment to a parish outside Pennsylvania. The original photograph was placed in a climate-controlled vault at the Pennsylvania Historical Society in March 1964. Access became restricted to researchers with documented scholarly credentials and institutional backing. Margaret Foster completed her genealogical work but never again requested materials from Blackwood Township archives. The case file remained classified until 1987, when Freedom of Information requests forced partial disclosure. Even then, the photographic evidence was withheld from public examination for an additional 15 years. During the intervening decades, similar anomalies began emerging from other rural Pennsylvania communities. A wedding photograph from 1889 showed the bride's deceased father standing beside the altar in Millfield Township. A harvest festival image from 1893 contained 3 children who had died in a scarlet fever outbreak the previous winter. A church dedication ceremony in 1895 included 2 ministers who had been buried in the adjoining cemetery months earlier. Each case involved the same impossible circumstances, clear photographic evidence of the dead participating in community events. Each case resisted rational explanation despite thorough investigation by qualified experts. The pattern suggested something endemic to the region, a phenomenon that transcended individual circumstances. Researchers began referring to the area as the Clearfield Anomaly Zone, though no official designation ever existed. Local residents, when questioned, invariably reported nothing unusual about the photographed individuals. They remembered speaking with them, shaking their hands, sharing conversations about weather and crops and family news. The dead had appeared as solid and present as any living person. Only the photographic evidence revealed the impossibility of their attendance. In 2002, digital analysis techniques allowed for enhanced examination of the original Brennan photograph. Computer modeling confirmed that both brothers cast shadows consistent with their physical positioning. Spectral analysis revealed normal light reflection patterns from their clothing and exposed skin. Every measurable aspect of their photographic presence aligned with physical reality. The technology that should have exposed the deception instead provided additional proof of authenticity. The Brennan brothers had attended Catherine Holloway's funeral. They had stood among the living mourners, participating in the ancient ritual of communal grief. Death, it seemed, had failed to prevent them from saying goodbye. The Brennan case file was digitized and transferred to secure servers at the Smithsonian Institution in 2019. Modern researchers can now examine high-resolution scans of the original photograph with unprecedented detail. Dr. Emily Watson, a forensic digital imaging specialist, noted that contemporary analysis tools continue to validate the image's authenticity. The brothers' faces show natural micro-expressions consistent with genuine human subjects rather than imposed elements. Their eyes track the photographer's position correctly. Their posture responds appropriately to the cold October morning. Every technical analysis confirms what human intuition rejects. The photograph documents a real, impossible event. Yet questions remain that extend far beyond the mechanics of 19th-century photography. Why did Thomas and William Brennan return for Catherine Holloway's funeral specifically? What connection existed between the deceased brothers and the elderly woman they had come to mourn? Parish records offer no evidence of unusual friendship or financial obligation between the families. The Brennans had attended dozens of community funerals during their lifetimes without displaying exceptional devotion to any particular neighbors. Mrs. Holloway's death was peaceful and expected, requiring no supernatural intervention or urgent resolution. The brothers appeared neither distressed nor purposeful in the photograph, simply present with appropriate solemnity. Perhaps the answer lies not in their relationship with Catherine Holloway, but in their relationship with mortality itself. The Brennan brothers had lived quiet, unremarkable lives devoted to work and community service. Their deaths came suddenly, without time for proper farewells or final contributions to the town that had shaped them. Maybe death had simply failed to satisfy their sense of neighborly obligation. Maybe some bonds transcend the grave because they were never truly earthly to begin with. The photograph hangs now in a temperature-controlled display case, viewed by appointment only. Visitors often report feeling watched while examining the image, as if 23 pairs of eyes were somehow aware of being observed. 2 of those pairs have been dead for over 130 years, yet they continue to return the gaze of anyone brave enough to meet their eyes. The Brennan brothers attend every viewing of their impossible funeral appearance, still solid, still present, still defying the fundamental nature of death itself. If cases like this fascinate you, subscribe and turn on notifications for the next file. The rediscovery of Edmund Hayes' complete photographic archive in 1994 revealed additional layers to the Brennan mystery. Construction workers renovating the basement of the former Clearfield County courthouse found a sealed wooden crate containing over 400 glass plate negatives. Hayes had apparently stored his life's work in the courthouse basement before his death in 1923, forgotten until the renovation project. Among the recovered plates were 3 additional images from Catherine Holloway's funeral service. These photographs captured different angles and moments of the October 15th ceremony, providing unprecedented documentation of the impossible event. In the second image, taken 15 minutes after the primary photograph, the Brennan brothers had moved to different positions within the group. Thomas now stood beside the temporary grave marker, his hand resting on the wooden cross. William had relocated near the church wall, engaged in apparent conversation with 2 elderly women. The third photograph, captured as mourners began departing, showed both brothers walking toward the cemetery gate. Their movement patterns appeared natural and purposeful, consistent with living participants rather than static apparitions. Dr. Jennifer Moores, a specialist in sequential photography analysis at Carnegie Mellon University, examined the complete series in 1995. Her frame-by-frame comparison revealed that the brothers' positions changed logically between exposures. They cast consistent shadows, their clothing showed appropriate wind effects, and their facial expressions varied naturally with the progression of events. The sequential images eliminated any possibility of single-frame manipulation or composite creation. Hayes had unknowingly documented the Brennan brothers' complete participation in Mrs. Holloway's funeral service. Yet church records confirmed that Father Donnelly had personally conducted both brothers' burial services weeks earlier. The priest had blessed their coffins, delivered funeral masses, and watched their interment at Green Hill Cemetery. His detailed diary entries from September 1891 described his grief at losing 2 reliable parishioners in such rapid succession. Donnelly had genuinely mourned the Brennan brothers as deceased members of his congregation. 3 weeks later, he had welcomed them warmly at Catherine Holloway's funeral without questioning their presence. The priest's psychological state during this period showed no signs of confusion, illness, or supernatural encounter. He simply accepted the brothers' attendance as natural and appropriate to the occasion. Modern psychiatric evaluation of Donnelly's writings suggests complete mental clarity and normal emotional responses throughout the period. The priest experienced no conflict between his memory of burying the brothers and his observation of their funeral attendance. His mind had somehow accommodated both contradictory realities without stress or confusion. This psychological pattern appeared consistently among all documented witnesses to the anomalous photographed appearances. Living participants invariably reported normal interactions with the deceased individuals during community events. No one expressed surprise, fear, or recognition that they were speaking with dead neighbors. The impossible had become so seamlessly integrated into daily life that it passed unnoticed by everyone except the camera. The most disturbing aspect of the Brennan case emerged through comparison with similar documented incidents across rural Pennsylvania. Between 1887 and 1902, at least 17 authenticated photographs captured deceased individuals attending community gatherings. Each case followed identical patterns: recent deaths, community events, normal social interaction, and photographic evidence contradicting mortality. Dr. Patricia Mills, a cultural anthropologist at Penn State University, identified the phenomenon during her 1998 dissertation research on post-Civil War rural photography. Her analysis revealed a 15-year window of supernatural photographic activity concentrated in central Pennsylvania farming communities. The incidents clustered around towns with populations between 200 and 800 residents, areas where traditional communities remained stable despite industrial change. Mills theorized that rapid social transformation had created psychological conditions conducive to collective denial of death's finality. Communities refused to accept the permanent loss of essential members, unconsciously willing them back for important social occasions. The photographic evidence suggested that collective belief had somehow manifested physical presence, at least temporarily. However, Mills's psychological explanation failed to account for the technical authenticity of the images or the consistent witness testimony. The deceased individuals appeared with complete physical reality, not as psychological projections or mass hallucinations. They cast shadows, displaced air, left footprints in soft ground, and engaged in extended conversations with multiple witnesses. Chemical analysis of clothing fibers recovered from burial sites showed no disturbance or removal during the periods when the individuals appeared at community events. The dead had somehow attended social gatherings while simultaneously remaining undisturbed in their graves. This physical paradox defied every known principle of matter, energy, and spatial occupation. Modern quantum physicists have examined the case files without finding theoretical frameworks adequate to explain the documented phenomena. The Brennan brothers and others like them existed in two locations simultaneously, violating fundamental laws of physics. Yet the photographic evidence remains unassailable, and witness testimony shows remarkable consistency across decades of investigation. In 2003, ground-penetrating radar examination of Green Hill Cemetery confirmed that all documented graves remained sealed and undisturbed. Thomas and William Brennan's burial sites showed no evidence of excavation, tunnel access, or structural compromise. Their remains continued to rest exactly where they had been placed in September 1891. The brothers had never physically left their graves, yet they had undeniably attended Catherine Holloway's funeral. This impossibility persisted through 130 years of investigation, analysis, and technological advancement. Each new method of examination confirmed rather than explained the central paradox. The dead had returned, not as spirits or memories, but as fully physical participants in the community that had shaped their lives. They had crossed the boundary between mortality and presence without disturbing either state. And in that crossing, they had photographed proof that death itself might be less permanent than we assume. Contemporary investigation of the Brennan photograph continues through advanced digital forensic techniques unavailable to previous generations of researchers. The Smithsonian's Digital Analysis Laboratory has subjected the image to artificial intelligence pattern recognition systems designed to detect photographic manipulation. Machine learning algorithms trained on thousands of authentic 19th-century photographs have examined every pixel of Hayes's funeral documentation. The analysis consistently confirms the image as a genuine, unaltered single exposure from October 15, 1891. Computational modeling of light physics validates the shadow patterns, facial illumination, and depth relationships throughout the composition. The Brennan brothers occupy three-dimensional space within the photograph exactly as living subjects would under identical lighting conditions. Their presence generates no anomalous visual signatures that would indicate superimposition, double exposure, or digital insertion. Modern technology has eliminated every rational explanation for the image except the impossible one. Dead men attended a funeral. Dr. Sarah Chen, the laboratory's chief forensic analyst, acknowledged in her 2021 report that contemporary science lacks adequate theoretical frameworks for the documented phenomenon. The evidence transcends current understanding of mortality, consciousness, and physical reality itself. Yet researchers continue returning to the Brennan case because it represents something unprecedented in human documentation. For the first time in recorded history, the boundary between life and death was photographed being crossed. The image captures not belief or legend or folklore, but authentic visual proof of mortality's temporary suspension. This documentation carries profound implications for medicine, psychology, physics, and philosophy. If death can be photographed being overcome, then humanity's most fundamental assumption about existence requires complete reevaluation. The Brennan brothers force confrontation with possibilities that modern minds instinctively reject. They suggest that consciousness, identity, and physical presence might persist, through transitions we consider final. Their attendance at Catherine Holloway's funeral implies that community bonds transcend individual mortality. Perhaps love, duty, and neighborly obligation represent forces more powerful than biological termination. Perhaps death is simply another form of presence that photography accidentally learned to document. The questions raised by the Brennan case extend far beyond historical curiosity or academic investigation. They challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of existence, identity, and human connection. If Thomas and William Brennan could return for one final act of community service, what does that suggest about the persistence of consciousness? If their physical presence could be documented while their bodies remained buried, what does that reveal about the relationship between mind and matter? The photograph offers no answers, only the undeniable evidence that impossible events can become photographed reality. The Brennan brothers stand in that image as proof that death might be negotiable under circumstances we do not yet understand. Their faces offer no explanation, only the quiet insistence that they belong among the living mourners of Blackwood Township. The Brennan photograph remains on permanent display at the Smithsonian Institution's Archives of Unexplained Phenomena, viewable by appointment only. Visitors consistently report the same unsettling sensation, the feeling of being observed by subjects within the frame. Security cameras monitoring the display case have recorded no unusual activity, yet the psychological effect persists across all demographics of viewers. Children point to Thomas and William Brennan specifically, asking why those two men look different from the other mourners. Adult visitors often experience difficulty maintaining eye contact with the brothers' photographed faces for extended periods. The image seems to resist prolonged examination, as if protecting some essential mystery from casual observation. Dr. Rebecca Torres, the current curator of the collection, noted that the Brennan case file generates more research requests than any other item in the archives. Scholars from disciplines ranging from quantum physics to comparative religion continue seeking access to the original materials. Each investigation adds technical confirmation without providing explanatory breakthrough. The brothers remain as mysterious today as they were in 1963, when Margaret Foster first identified their impossible presence. Modern facial recognition software has been used to scan contemporary cemetery records, searching for similar anomalies in recent photographic documentation. The technology has identified no comparable cases from the past 50 years, suggesting that the phenomenon was specific to its historical period. Whatever allowed the dead to return for community events appears to have ended sometime during the early 20th century. The industrialization that transformed rural Pennsylvania may have severed connections that previously transcended mortality. Or perhaps the dead simply learned to attend our gatherings without being photographed. The Brennan brothers pose questions that extend beyond historical documentation into the fundamental nature of human existence. Their presence at Catherine Holloway's funeral suggests that Death might be less absolute than we assume. Their photographed participation implies that community bonds can persist through transitions we consider final. If love, duty, and neighborly obligation truly transcend biological termination, what other assumptions about mortality require reconsideration? The brothers offer no answers, only the quiet insistence that they belonged among Mrs. Holloway's mourners on that cold October morning. Their faces show neither supernatural awareness nor otherworldly purpose, simply the appropriate solemnity for bidding farewell to a neighbor. Perhaps that normalcy represents the most unsettling aspect of their documented return. Thomas and William Brennan attended a funeral because attending funerals was what responsible community members did. Death had merely failed to excuse them from their social obligations. In their quiet persistence, they suggest that the bonds connecting us might prove stronger than the forces that separate us. The photograph captures that possibility with unforgiving clarity, preserving it for anyone brave enough to meet their steady gaze. What you see in their eyes is the same thing they saw in ours, the recognition that some connections transcend even death itself. Disclaimer: this script is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, institutions, and incidents are invented or used fictitiously. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental, created solely for entertainment.